Hello everyone, happy Friday. Welcome to Within the Frame, where we delve deeper into the top stories not only in South Korea but across the globe. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Just 1 year ago, on January 27th, a new industrial safety law, the Serious Accidents Punishment Act, went into effect, aiming to reduce the number of occupational fatalities. The law holds business owners and managers legally responsible for serious accidents involving worker deaths. 1 year has passed, but statistics makes us wonder whether the law was truly effective. Many voices cite the law's lack of clarity as the main reason for not having been able to hold management accountable for fatal industrial accidents. Business people say, meanwhile, penalties for CEOs are excessive and that the law rather hampers companies' growth. Is the new safety law really not effective, or will it take some time to settle down? If there really is some insecurities in the law, how should it be revised? For an in-depth analysis, we invited Professor Cho Hee-kyung from Hongik University on the line through Skype. Professor, welcome to the show.
Hello, good evening.
And we also have Mark Kyua Beck, Associate Attorney at Jipyeong LSC, on the line as well. Mr. Beck, thank you for your time.
Hello, good evening.
Right, Professor Cho, Serious Accidents Punishment Act came into effect just 1 year ago on January 27th. What does the law state and how and why was it passed?
We had a series of workplace fatalities that led up to the passage of the law. In particular, there was a dreadful accident where a 24-year-old young man was caught and squeezed to death in a conveyor belt in a coal plant. And another accident where a cleaner in the subway was again caught between the sliding doors and died. And these were entirely preventable accidents that could have been avoided had basic safety precautions been taken by the companies responsible. But for a very long time, it was considered that the companies who are actually responsible for the work essentially subcontract them out, and the subcontractors who end up doing the work are squeezed in terms of costs, so they are not able to take proper safety measures and end up cutting corners, which led to these kind of fatalities. And so by holding the ultimate CEO of the head company responsible, it was hoped that the responsible companies would actually take greater care. But 1 year into the law coming into effect, we find that it hasn't really had the impact that it was hoped.
Right. Now, I would like to see through statistics whether this law is working well and whether it is effectively reducing the number of unfortunate deaths at workplaces. Now, Mr. Beck, unfortunately, some say there has been no improvement in the number of workplace deaths since the implementation of the act. According to the Labor Ministry, the death toll at workplaces with over 50 or more people, which are subject to the law, has rather risen overall. Why no progress?
So firstly, the companies complain that there are some gray areas in the law. For example, the Article 4 of the SAPA states that a business owner or a responsible managing officer shall take managerial measures necessary to perform duties under safety and health-related statutes or regulations, but it does not specifically mention what those duties are. The enforcement decree of the SAPA does not specify any further either. So there are some unclear points about the law, and the companies argue that they are having a hard time following these unclear responsibilities under the law. But most importantly, I think the reason why we see no progress in the industrial accidents is because many small and mid-sized companies are not capable of taking necessary measures required by the law. So far, there are 10 out of 11 prosecuted SAPA cases took place in small companies, and another case happened in a middle-sized company. And 8 out of 11 prosecuted SAPA cases took place in construction industry, where most companies are run in small size. SMEs usually do not have enough resources to set up all the preventive systems SAPA requires. So I think that's the key reason. The last reason could be time. The law went into effect exactly 1 year ago, so it's only been a year. The law is about setting up preventive measures, and it's a completely new law. We don't even have any completed case at the court yet, so maybe we need to wait a little longer to see any actual progress. So there could be three reasons. One, the gray areas in the law. Two, the SME's incapability to follow the law. And three, the short time period. These could be the reason why we don't see any visible progress so far.
Right, that was a clear explanation why there was no progress until now. But Professor Joe, I'd like to take a look at the total number of deaths by sector. And out of 644, most of them were at construction sites. And pundits cite the multi-level subcontracting structure of most of construction companies as the main reason. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, certainly construction sector has the highest number of deaths and injuries. One, because of the nature of the work that's being done by the industry, there is obviously much higher risk of being injured or hurt at work in heavy and chemical industries, including construction industry. So it's to do with the nature of work, but also on top of that is this multi-tiered subcontracting system that exists particularly in the construction industry. Now, the reason why we have many small operators in construction industry, I think, are twofold. First, because construction industry is very cyclical, and so employers don't necessarily want to retain too many employees on their books permanently. And so what they try to do is to maintain a very slim workforce and contract out most of the tasks that can be contracted out. And so that's one reason. Second is there is a deliberate downsizing so that they can take advantage of the gaps in the labor laws and related laws that exempt small operators, particularly those that are fewer than 5 employees. This serious industrial accidents law is another one of those. And so the effort to try to take advantage of this deliberate gap is another factor. So this multi-layered subcontracting certainly, at each level, profit is skimmed off the top. And so when you get right to the bottom with the subcontractor who's actually doing the work, they are so short of money that they end up cutting corners and trying to reduce cost at every single turn. And so, they don't even take basic precautions like wearing hard hats on construction sites and having proper scaffoldings and things like those. And so that's naturally going to result in more deaths.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Beck, according to the Labor Ministry again, 229 cases were reported under the new safety rule, but among these, only 11 were led to indictments and none have resulted in any verdict from a court. I know that it has been only a year since the implementation of the law, but still, I wonder why so?
So there have been 229 SAPA cases. The investigation was completed for 52 cases, and 11 cases led to prosecution, so the prosecution rate is about 20%. The overall prosecution rate for the criminal cases, all criminal cases, is about 30%. So compared to other criminal cases, the prosecution rate for the SAPA cases is currently pretty low. The reason could be that the SAPA is a new law, and it entails very strong punishment for the business owners. Also, one of the cases has applied for the constitutional review of the law, so there's a question over whether the law is constitutional or not. On top of that, the public and the media are giving a lot of attention on the SAPA issues. So the investigation agency and the prosecutor's office are very cautious in applying the law, and the change and charge the business owners or responsible management officers criminally. Another possible reason could be that it requires intent or gross negligence. You need more than just simple negligence. So the prosecutor should have enough evidence to prove the business owner's intent or their gross negligence. So this can also contribute to the low prosecution rate. So the agencies are really cautious about the SAPA cases currently, but I guess it will get faster as the cases accrue.
Right, we'll have to have our fingers crossed for this process to become much faster. But thankfully, Mr. Pak actually brought up the issue of the law, whether it is constitutional. Now, Professor Cho, among the indicted, a company called Dusung Industry in Changwon, which was actually the first case that has been prosecuted for the poisoning of 16 workers, asked the court to have constitutional court decide whether this law is actually constitutional, citing the vagueness in its application. I know that Mr. Pak partly brought up the vagueness in advance, but could you elaborate more to us?
Certainly, companies and senior managers are complaining that it's not clear who the responsible manager is under the law. It's also not clear what duties they're supposed to perform to meet the requirements of the law. But that's like arguing that Article 2 of our Civil Code is too vague and therefore unconstitutional. As a lot of people know, Article 2 of Civil Code simply imposes a duty of good faith when you are acting in contract or in any conduct in legal relations. But nobody says that, well, this is too vague and therefore this article is unconstitutional. Likewise, it's impossible to set out each and every liability and responsibility of the managers and senior officers in a company when it comes to how to ensure that workers and employees are kept safe. For example, in a smelter, it would be a common sense thing to do to have safety guardrails around a boiling, steel or boiling metal, and companies don't even do that. And there's been deaths that have occurred where a worker fell into such a boiling vat of metal because such guardrail was not present. It would be a common sense thing to do to ensure that there are two people present when employees have to lift heavy things and there's a risk of being caught in a machinery. Things like that happened in bakery premises, the coal plant that I mentioned earlier. But you can't spell all of these things out in a single piece of legislation. Those things have to be done at the site in practice. So what can be done is to perhaps make manuals, but to say that the law in its current state is too vague and therefore unconstitutional, I think is simply a red herring.
Right. Now, Mr. Beck, actually, another issue attorneys have brought up is that the punishments may be excessive. Now, currently under the law, business chiefs are subject to at least a 1-year prison term or a criminal fine of up to 1 billion Korean won, that is around $810,000 US. That is the level of punishment really tough compared to other laws?
That's the argument from the business community. For example, the settlement of the traffic accident law states that in a fatal traffic accident, the driver can be charged up to 5 years of imprisonment or a criminal fine up to 20 million won. But under SAPA, a business owner will be charged for at least 1 year of imprisonment or up to 1 billion won fine. So compared to other laws, the punishment under SAPA is fairly strong for the business owners. But there could be another argument that Korea has unusually high fatal industrial accident rate among OECD countries, and it has been like that for so long. So there is an urgent need to lower the rate to protect the employees' lives, and thus such strong punishment is justified. Ultimately, the Constitutional Court will review and decide whether it is too strong compared to other laws and thus unconstitutional.
Right, Mr. Beck. Ultimately, like you said, the Constitutional Court will be the one to review. But if the Constitutional Court does get to reevaluate the law, what is going to happen to those cases that are already in trial? In Dusung Industry case where the constitutional review is applied, the court process will stop for a little bit until the constitutional review comes out. But other cases will continue without any halt.
Yesterday, it was reported that a different SAPA case in Changwon District Court, Korea Steel, is likely to be concluded in early February. It's the case where a subcontractor's employee has died in a steel factory in March last year. But other cases are likely to wait for the result of the constitutional review because it may change the whole picture.
Right. Now, Professor Cho, it seems like there are a lot of problems in the law right now, and so the government seeks to revise the act based on self-regulation. I wonder what self-regulation is, and what is the gist of this new roadmap?
Well, that's the big question. One does wonder what self-regulation means in this context, because it's essentially leaving up to the company to regulate themselves. And so how is that going to make it more safe for workers? I don't know. We've seen what self-regulation can do through the global financial crisis that occurred, which was a result of allowing financial companies to self-regulate. The companies had plenty of opportunities to self-regulate up until now to improve their safety practices, and they haven't done so. And for the government to say that companies should be left to self-regulation is actually being incredibly irresponsible. I also wanted to add a comment about the business community arguing that the punishment under the law is just too harsh and severe compared to other laws. They cite this Traffic Accidents and Injuries Act, which is a classic example of a deliberate act by the government to try to promote and encourage the development of industry rather than putting people's safety first. That particular piece of legislation was enacted back in 1980s when Korea was trying to really develop its automotive industry, and it really cheapened the value of human life. And so to compare that law, which I'm embarrassed to say that which is still on our books, and this serious industrial accidents law is really showing that the business community is clutching at straws to try to justify their irresponsible claims.
Right. Now, Professor Cho, one more question to you. Starting 2024, companies with fewer than 50 employees would be subject to law. But such small and medium-sized companies say securing safety management capabilities is really tough for them. What measures should government take to help them?
Well, because those SMEs do not have as much resources as large companies do, they certainly do need more assistance. Preventative measures are much more important than coming up with punishment later. And so the government should really provide much more guidance and assistance in helping those companies to have safety measures and systems in place by, for example, providing manuals, helping them with inspections of the site, helping them to essentially put in place systemic procedures to take care of safety issues, and possibly even providing safety supervisory assistance when required. So the government should actually have some budget set aside to provide these kind of assistance.
Right. Mr. Beck, now we get that the law focuses on holding the head of companies accountable and punishment. And now we also get that there could be some problems regarding the law that can be improved. But what I wonder is, none of the media outlets talk about the victims and how they should be compensated. Does this law mention any of that? Or if there are other laws for victims, are they protecting victims enough?
The Article 15 of the SAPA defines a punitive damage up to 5 times of the damages for the victim. But at the same time, the proviso to the article states that it shall not apply to cases where the company has put due attention and supervision concerning the issue. Other than that, the victim can claim normal damages under the civil law when there is any negligence by the employer. And also, this may be covered by they may be covered by the industrial accident compensation insurance. The punitive damage is not very common in Korean law, and the SAPA is recently introduced, so it's hard to figure out at this moment whether this could be enough for the victims. We'll see how it goes.
Right. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition, but thank you, Professor Cho and Mr. Beck, for your insights. We really appreciate them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, all right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. Enjoy a great weekend, and we will be back on Monday with more in-depth stories on the issues happening in South Korea and, of course, around the globe. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.